My hands know the language of bodies. They know where tension hides, where stress builds up in tight knots under the skin. They learn each client's map, the geography of chronic shoulder pain, the valleys of fatigue in the lower back, the tense plains of an overworked neck. It's a communication without words, a trust built on the right pressure, in the right silence. My profession is the art of drawing and respecting boundaries. I've built my life, my studio, my sanctuary, around this one premise, to create a safe space where touch is therapeutic, clinical, and impersonal. I was a master at it, a guardian of boundaries. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like to get access to more stories like this. And then there was Cole. Cole was the exception to all my rules, even though he'd never been on my table. Our 6-year friendship was my counterpoint, the place where the lines blurred. He was the welcome chaos in my orderly routine. A software engineer, logical, with a sense of humor so dry it sometimes took me a second to get the joke. He was the guy who'd call me in the middle of a disastrous woodworking project, his voice coated in sawdust and frustration. Or who'd show up at my door with beer and pizza after a day I'd spent absorbing the pain of 10 different strangers. He was my normal. My friendship with him was the most solid structure in my life, and for that very reason, the most dangerous. Because in the quiet of my own thoughts, when I was alone in my perfectly tidy studio, I knew the line that defined us as friends was the most fragile one of all. And I lived with a constant, silent fear of what would happen if one of us tripped over it. I loved him with a loyalty that scared me, a depth I kept under lock and key behind my calm, professional demeanor. He was my best friend, and that title was both my greatest joy and my heaviest armor. My studio is an extension of my house, but it might as well be on another planet. The door that separates it from the living room is a frontier. When I cross it, I leave Leo the friend, the son, the neighbor, behind, and I become the professional. The air inside is different. I design it to be that way. It's heavy with the scent of essential oils, a blend I've perfected over the years. Lavender to calm, sandalwood to ground, and an almost imperceptible note of eucalyptus to clarify. The lighting is always indirect, coming from wall sconces on dimmers, creating an amber glow that softens outlines and calms the mind before the work even begins. There are no windows to the outside world. The only view is inward. What you're hearing here is just the beginning. The full stories, unfiltered, and with all the details you can imagine, are available now. Check the link in the description right now. My routine was a ritual. Wake up at 6. Meditate for 15 minutes, focusing on my own breath so I could later focus on others. Prepping the studio was like a priest preparing his temple, folding the towels, which came out of the dryer warm and soft, into perfect rolls, checking the room's temperature, lining up the oil bottles on their dark wood shelves, turning on the small slate fountain in the corner, whose sound of running water was the metronome for my day, a constant beat that masked the street noise and the ticking of clocks. My days were a succession of bodies, each with its own story of aches and worries. I was the silent confessor for tense muscles and tired minds. I'd hear about difficult bosses, problem children, financial fears, all communicated through the tightness of a trapezius or the clenching of a calf muscle. And at the end of each session, I would guide the person back to reality, offer a glass of water, and watch them leave, leaving an echo of their tension behind, which I would meticulously clean and purify before the next arrival. It was a cycle of absorption and release. And when the last client left, I'd reverse the ritual. I'd clean every surface, change the sheets on the table, and turn off the water fountain. The silence that settled in was absolute, heavy. It was in that silence that my own loneliness, the one I kept at a distance during the day, would sometimes creep in. It was in that silence that the thought of Cole often appeared, not as a potential client, but as the embodiment of a vibrant, uncomplicated life that existed on the other side of that door. Our interactions were loud, full of laughter and conversations that stretched late into the night. My studio was the opposite, and I had never, ever, mixed the two worlds. The phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon. I was between clients, reading a book on my living room couch, on the normal side of the house. I saw Cole's name on the screen and answered with my usual, "What's up, trouble?" But the voice on the other end wasn't my friend's. It was a client's. There was a forced formality, a hesitation that was completely unlike him. "Leo? Hey, listen. Do you have a free spot this week? Maybe tomorrow?" I blinked, confused. "A spot? For what? Another table saw disaster you need to show me?" There was a pause. I could almost hear him roll his eyes. "No, you idiot. A spot. For a massage. My back is killing me. I think I finally did a number on it. I sat up straight. For years, I joked that he desperately needed a session, that he was a case study in bad posture. He'd always laugh and say the idea of his best friend seeing him in just a towel was too weird. And now, he was calling, formally. The routine, the pattern, the comfortable rhythm of our friendship, it all suffered a small fracture in that moment. Seriously? I asked, trying to keep my tone light. The great Cole has finally surrendered to my talents? Yeah, well, pain won out over the weirdness, he admitted, and his voice sounded a little more like himself. So, can you or not? I opened my scheduling app, a purely professional gesture that felt bizarre in this context. I have an opening tomorrow at 4 p.m. Does that work? Perfect. See you there. And, thanks. He hung up. I stared at the phone for a long time. See you there. Not, I'll swing by. Not see ya. See you there. He was referring to the studio, my sanctuary. The place where Cole, the friend, had never set foot. A wave of nervousness I didn't expect hit me. It was just a sore back. I was a professional. But it wasn't just anyone. It was him. And suddenly, the line I'd guarded so carefully seemed to have been redrawn, leaving me on the outside of my own safe territory. The next day, at 4 on the dot, the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, smoothed down my professional shirt, and opened the door. Cole was standing there, and for a moment, his familiarity calmed me. He was wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt, but there was a tension in his shoulders that wasn't just muscular. His eyes met mine, and he gave a sheepish smile. "Hey," he said, his voice a little too quiet. "Hey," I replied, opening the door wider. "Come on in. Welcome to my office." He stepped inside and looked around the waiting area, which is really just a small hall before the studio door. He'd been to my house hundreds of times, but his gaze was that of a stranger, taking in the details, the atmosphere. "It's really calm in here," he commented. "That's the idea." I opened the studio door. "This way." The moment he crossed that threshold was significant. The air seemed to change in density. He stopped, his eyes adjusting to the low light, scanning the massage table in the center, the shelves of oils, the fountain in the corner. He inhaled discreetly. "Wow, smells good." "It's part of the experience," I said, my voice sounding more formal than I intended. The script was taking over. "You can leave your things on the hook there. The bathroom's through that door if you need it. I'll let you get changed. You can take everything off and lie face down on the table, with your head in that cradle. Cover yourself with the towel that's folded on the table. I'll knock before I come back in." I recited the instructions I give 5 times a day, but to him, every word felt strange and calculated. Cole just nodded, not making a single joke. He avoided my gaze, took off his jacket, placed his wallet and phone on the small table, and walked toward the massage table. I left and closed the door, the soft click sounding like a vault sealing shut. Outside, in the hallway, I rested my forehead against the cool wood of the door and closed my eyes. "It's just a massage," I repeated to myself. "He's in pain. You're going to help him." But my heart was beating to a rhythm that was anything but therapeutic. I knocked on the door. A muffled voice said, "Come in." When I entered, he was already lying down, his long, familiar body almost entirely covered by the white towel. Only his broad back and shoulders were exposed. The room was just as it always was, but with him in it, it felt like an entirely new universe. The massage began like any other. I approached the table, picked up the bottle of almond oil, and poured a small amount into my hands, warming it by rubbing them together. The sound was the only noise besides the fountain. "I'm going to start now, Cole," I announced softly. "The oil might be a little cold at first." I spread the oil across his back. His skin goosebumped slightly at the first touch. I started with long, fluid strokes, from the top of his shoulders to the base of his lower back, to warm up the muscles. My hands, which knew the way by heart on any body, felt like both experts and beginners at the same time. I knew the shape of that back from seeing him at the beach, at the pool, but to feel it under my fingers was different. It was a new intimacy, disguised as a clinical procedure. "The pain is mostly here, right?" I asked, applying light pressure to the right side of his lower back. He let out a grunt of confirmation. "Right there." "Yep." I focused on that area, using my thumb to work out the knots of tension. His muscles were as hard as rock. I could feel the result of hours hunched over a keyboard, combined with the strain of some poorly executed home project. The conversation stopped. The only sound was our breathing and the soft music. As I worked, I felt the tension start to give way. His shoulders, once hiked up toward his ears, relaxed. His breathing, once short and shallow, deepened. He let out a long sigh, a sound of pure surrender. And it was in that sound that the connection began to shift. It was no longer a client's sigh of relief. It was Cole's sigh, and my body reacted to it. I felt a warmth creep up my neck. My hands didn't falter. They remained steady and professional. But my mind started to wander. I was hyper-aware of everything, of the texture of his skin under my palms, the way a muscle would twitch and then release under my pressure, of the closeness of our bodies, separated only by a few inches of charged air. Professionalism was a thin cloak, and I could feel it wearing thin with every movement. Every glide of my hand over his skin felt more significant than it should. I tried to focus on the technique, on the names of the muscles, on the origin and insertion of each fiber. But the reality was much simpler and more overwhelming. I was touching my best friend in a way I never had before, and something inside me, something I had kept dormant for years, was waking up violently. I could feel the conflict in my own hands. One part of them wanted to heal, to relieve the pain he felt. The other part wanted to explore, wanted to know what that touch would feel like without the pretext of therapy. I fought to keep the pressure firm and clinical, but my thumbs seemed to want to linger a little longer in certain spots. My palms seemed to want to rest with more weight than necessary. It was a silent war waged on the surface of his skin. And him? He was quiet. Too quiet. Cole was a guy who filled silence. But there, on my table, he was surrendered to it. His breathing was the only feedback I was getting, and it became my obsession. I'd hear it deepen when I hit a point of tension, and I'd hear it catch for an instant when my hand passed too close to his side, near the line of the towel. I wondered what was going through his head. If, for him, this was just a weirdly silent massage with a friend, or if he felt the electricity in the air too. The uncertainty was torture. The fear that I was imagining it all, that I was projecting my own repressed feelings onto innocent gestures, was paralyzing. But the fear that I was right, that was even worse. Because if I was right, if he was feeling it too, then we were both standing on the edge of a cliff, pretending to admire the view. And I had no idea who would take the first step. Time in my studio came undone. Minutes stretched until they were elastic, indistinguishable. My hands, which once moved with a clear, technical purpose, now seemed to hesitate. The work was done. Cole's muscles were more relaxed. The pain he'd brought in had receded into a distant background. I knew the session was coming to an end. My protocol was clear. I should gradually decrease the pressure, make a few final, gentle movements, and then step away from the table to give the client their time before getting up. But my hands didn't want to obey the protocol. They wanted to stay. Finally, with an effort that felt physical, I stopped them. I let my palms rest for one last second on the warm skin of his back, a gesture that hovered dangerously between professional and personal. Then, I pulled away. Cool air rushed in to fill the space where my warmth had been. "Cole," I started, and my own voice sounded strange to my ears, a little too hoarse. "We're done with your back. I'll step out so you can turn over." It was the right thing to say. It was standard procedure. But the words were a lie. I didn't want to leave. I wanted to stay there and see his eyes. "Don't," he said. The word was a mumble against the headrest, almost inaudible. But to me, it sounded like thunder in the silent room. "You don't have to leave." My heart gave a violent leap against my ribs. I stood frozen beside the table, my hands now hanging uselessly at my sides. The sound of the water fountain seemed to have grown louder, each drop landing with the force of a hammer blow. "Okay," I whispered. "You can turn over then, slowly." I watched, motionless, as he moved. He pushed himself up with his arms, the movement slow and deliberate. And then it happened. As he turned to lie on his back, the thick white towel covering him from the waist down, which should have been held in place by his hand, was forgotten. It caught on his hip for an instant, and then slid off, landing in a white puddle of fabric on the floor beside the table. The silence that followed was unlike any other. It wasn't the calm silence of therapy, nor an awkward silence. It was a dense, heavy silence, filled with everything we hadn't said in 6 years. The air grew thin, hard to breathe. My professional instinct, my training, everything in me screamed to bend down, grab the towel and cover him, to restore order, to re-erect the barrier that had just crumbled. But I didn't move. My feet felt nailed to the floor. And Cole, he didn't move either. He made no motion to cover himself, showed no sign of embarrassment or panic. He just completed the turn, settling onto his back, and his eyes found mine. And in that look, I saw everything. There was nervousness. Yes, there was a raw vulnerability I had never seen in him. But underneath it all, there was an invitation, a silent but unmistakable permission. He hadn't pulled the towel off, but he hadn't done anything to keep it on either. It was an act of passive surrender, leaving fate, or me, to decide the next move. The whole room seemed to hold its breath. The scent of lavender and sandalwood suddenly became intoxicating, almost suffocating. I saw the rise and fall of his chest, his breathing visibly faster now, and I saw the question in his eyes. It was the same question echoing in my own mind. The moment stretched on, an eternity contained in seconds. The choice was mine. Grab the towel and retreat to the safety of our friendship, pretending nothing had happened, or take a step forward and accept the invitation, and in doing so, burn the bridge that would lead us back. I took a step forward. My knees touched the side of the table. I leaned over him, and the world shrank to the space between our faces. My hand came up, not for the fallen towel, but for his face. My fingers traced the line of his jaw, feeling the light scruff of his unshaven beard. It was the first touch that had no therapeutic purpose. It was a touch of pure intention. He closed his eyes at my contact, a shaky exhale escaping his lips. I leaned in further and kissed him. The initial kiss was soft, hesitant. It was a final question, one last chance for either of us to pull back. But there was no retreat. Instead, I felt Cole's hand come up and tangle in my hair at the nape of my neck, pulling me closer with an urgency that unraveled any doubt that might have been left. The kiss deepened, becoming hungry, desperate. It was a kiss that carried the weight of years of unspoken feelings, of lingering glances, of a closeness that always tested the boundaries of friendship. It tasted of his skin, of salt and massage oil, a strange and perfect mix. It was the breaking of a spell. My hands began a new exploration. They, which had once mapped his muscles for pain, now mapped his body for pleasure. I slid my palms over his chest, feeling the strong, rapid beat of his heart under my hand. It was the same frantic rhythm as my own. I moved down over his abdomen, feeling his muscles clench under my touch. There was no longer a therapist and a client. No more barriers. We were just Leo and Cole, in a completely new and unknown territory. Every touch was a word in a conversation we'd never had. My mouth left his and traced a path down his neck, while my hands continued their discovery. I wanted to learn the language of his desire, to understand what made him sigh, what made his breath catch. He was a book I had always wanted to read, but had never had the courage to open. Now, its pages were open to me. He wasn't passive. His hands were exploring too, pulling me closer, his fingers digging into my shoulders, his legs tangling with mine. It was a mutual surrender, a giving into the moment we had both created, step by step, from the moment he called. Every caress, every kiss, was an affirmation. Yes, this is real. Yes, I want this too. Yes, I'm here. His logic, my caution, it all dissolved in the heat radiating from our bodies. It was a fusion, a collision that was at once gentle and overwhelming. The sound in the room changed. The water fountain was forgotten, replaced by the sound of our ragged breaths, of soft sighs, of the slide of skin against skin. It was the soundtrack of our transgression, the music of our truth. Time continued not to exist, but now space had also contracted, shrinking entirely to the surface of that massage table, to that tangle of limbs and desires. And at that peak, in that moment of pure connection, I was no longer healing the pain in his back. We were healing a much deeper ache in each other, a loneliness we both pretended not to feel. When the moment of intensity subsided, the silence that returned to the room was of a completely new kind. It was a heavy silence, thick with what had just happened, a silence full of wonder and a hint of shock. I pulled back a little, just enough to be able to look at him. We remained lying there, side by side on the narrow table, the air still vibrating with the energy we had released. My studio, my sanctuary of control and professionalism, had been transformed. The walls seemed to have witnessed not a transgression, but a baptism. That space would never be the same for me, because now it held the echo of that moment. The line between the professional and the personal hadn't just been crossed, it had been completely erased, burned to ashes. The emotional impact was like a wave slowly breaking on the shore. The adrenaline of desire gave way to a blinding, terrifying clarity. I looked at Cole. He was lying on his back, his arm thrown over his eyes, as if the dim light of the room was too bright. His chest rose and fell in a slow, deep rhythm. He was quiet, What was he thinking? The logical engineer, the man of certainties and plans, was now navigating an ocean of pure emotion. I felt a pang of panic. What if he regretted it? What if to him this was a mistake? A moment of weakness brought on by the vulnerability of the massage. The dynamic between us had irrevocably changed. We couldn't go back to my living room, open a beer, and pretend this didn't happen. The friendship as we knew it was dead, and I didn't know if what would be born from its ashes would be something beautiful or a wasteland of awkwardness and loss. The possibility of having lost him, of having traded the certainty of his friendship for that one moment of passion, hit me with physical force. But then he moved his arm. His eyes found mine in the silence. There was no panic in his gaze. There was no regret. There was awe, a kind of wonder, as if he had just discovered a new color. He seemed to be processing not just what had happened physically, but what it meant inside him. The experience, his first with another man, hadn't broken or confused him. On the contrary, it seemed to have solidified him, as if a piece he didn't know was missing had finally clicked into place. He didn't say anything. He just kept looking at me, and in that gaze, I felt the foundation of something new being formed. The connection we had forged there, in that moment of total vulnerability, was stronger than any fear. For me, it was the confirmation of a feeling I had buried so deep I'd almost convinced myself it didn't exist. To have him there, looking at me like that, after everything, was like taking a breath after being underwater for too long. The feeling was one of relief, a relief so deep and overwhelming it almost hurt. The loneliness I wore like a second skin had dissolved. I was no longer alone with my secret. Now, it was our secret. Time, which had previously disintegrated, began to reassemble. I became aware of the outside world again, of the low hum of electricity in the wall, of the distant sound of a siren miles away. And with that awareness came the inevitability of the next question, the next decision. What happens when the moment is over? What's left when passion recedes and reality walks into the room? We lay in silence for a long time, a silence that was no longer one of awe, but of processing. It was an "and now what?" silence. Every second that passed seemed to make the question louder, more urgent. I had to say something, anything. The responsibility of breaking the spell seemed to be mine, since the space was mine. The situation, in a way, initiated by me. I turned a little more on the narrow table to face him better. His expression was serene, but his eyes were distant, as if replaying everything in his mind. "Cole," my voice came out as a whisper. "Are you okay?" It was an inadequate question, almost ridiculous, for the magnitude of what had happened, but it was the only one I could form. He blinked slowly, his eyes focusing on me. He seemed to consider the question with the seriousness of an engineer analyzing a complex equation. An eternity seemed to pass before he answered. "I don't know," he said, his voice raw and honest. "I don't know what I am exactly, but I'm not okay. It's not regret, if that's what you're asking." He paused, licking his lips. "It's just big. It's bigger than I expected. Bigger than you expected," I repeated softly. "I thought, if this ever happened, it would just be physical," he confessed, his gaze shifting to the ceiling. "Curiosity. But it wasn't just that, was it? For me, it wasn't." A relief so profound washed over me that I felt my shoulders, which I hadn't even realized were tense, completely relax. "No," I said firmly. "It wasn't for me either." Another silence. But this one was different. It was a silence of agreement, of common ground. The fear of being alone in my feelings dissipated, replaced by the certainty that we were in this together, whatever this was. "I was so scared," I admitted in a low voice, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "For years. Scared of ruining the one thing I couldn't lose. Our friendship." He turned toward me, his body now fully facing mine on the table. His hand found mine, his fingers lacing with mine. The touch was different now. It wasn't exploratory or passionate. It was a touch of reassurance, of anchoring. "I was scared too," he said. "I think that's why I never booked this massage. I knew, somewhere deep down, that if I got on this table, in this room, something would give. I knew the line was too thin." His words were a gift. The confession that the tension wasn't one-sided, that the electricity I felt wasn't just a product of my imagination. He felt it too. He knew it too. The sun outside was beginning to set. I could see a sliver of orange light from under the studio door, a reminder that time was, in fact, passing. The world was still turning. indifferent to the revolution that had taken place in that small room. As night fell, the question of staying or leaving became inevitable. He would have to go home, back to his life, and I to mine. And we would have to see each other tomorrow or the next day and figure out how to act, how to be. The thought filled me with a cold dread. "It's getting late," I said, the phrase sounding stupid and practical in the midst of so much emotion. "Yeah," he answered, without letting go of my hand. The goodbye hung in the air, the unspoken word. He would get up, get dressed, and walk out the door, and we would both be left alone to deal with the fallout. The thought of watching him leave, of closing the door behind him and being alone in that now haunted studio, was unbearable. "Cole," I said, swallowing hard, "you don't have to go. Unless you want to." I offered him an out, a chance to classify this as a moment, a lapse, and retreat to safety. Part of me desperately wanted him not to take it, but the other part, the part that still loved him as a friend above all else, knew I had to give him that choice. He squeezed my hand tighter. His eyes, which had seemed confused before, were now clear and direct. "I don't want to," he said, and those 4 simple words rebuilt my universe. I don't want to go anywhere. The decision was made. It wasn't a decision about forever. It wasn't a marriage proposal or a declaration of eternal love. It was a decision about now, about not running away, about staying and facing the sunrise together. The emotion that took over me wasn't exuberant joy, but a deep, serene peace. The fear of the unknown was still there, a low hum in the back of my mind, but it was drowned out by the overwhelming feeling that, for the first time, I was exactly where I was supposed to be, and he was with me. There would be no goodbye tonight. We got up from the table, the movement a little awkward and shy, as if our bodies were readjusting to gravity and normalcy. The air was cooler away from the heat of our bodies. Cole picked up his clothes from the floor, and for an instant, the strangeness of the situation returned. Me, standing in the middle of my studio, and him, naked, holding his jeans. "You can take a shower if you want," I offered, trying to sound casual. "And I can lend you a shirt and some sweatpants to sleep in. They'll be a little short, but they're more comfortable than jeans." He gave me a small smile, a genuine smile that warmed the whole room. I'd love that. While he was in the shower, the sound of water running through the pipes now a comforting, domestic sound, I tidied up the studio. I changed the sheets on the table, folded the towel from the floor. It wasn't to erase what had happened, but to close that chapter. That space had served its purpose. When he came out of the bathroom, wearing my clothes, his hair damp and smelling of my soap, the sight hit me in an unexpected way. It was so domestic, so right. He didn't look like a stranger in my clothes. He looked like he belonged in them. We didn't go to my bedroom. It didn't feel right. The bed was a territory with its own history. Instead, without a word, we grabbed the blankets and pillows from my closet and took them to the living room. We lay down on the large couch, the tight space forcing us close. And in the dark, with the only sound being our synchronized breathing, the conversation we hadn't had before began to flow. We talked about the fear, about the friendship, about the small moments over the years when one of us almost said something, almost made a move, but pulled back. We discovered that our secret history was, in fact, a shared history, lived in parallel. I fell asleep feeling the weight of his arm over me, the security of his presence beside me. It wasn't a deep sleep. It was a light sleep, punctuated by moments when I'd wake up just to make sure he was still there, that it hadn't been an incredibly vivid and cruel dream. The morning light that came through the living room window was soft, filtered. I woke up first. For a few moments I watched Cole sleep. His face, in repose, looked younger, free of the tension he usually carried. The worry lines on his forehead were gone. I thought of all the mornings I had woken up alone in my bed, of all the routines I had performed on autopilot, and I knew, with a certainty that echoed in my soul, that nothing would ever be the same. He woke up slowly, blinking against the light. His eyes found mine, and there was no awkwardness, no mourning after embarrassment. There was just a quiet recognition. A slow smile spread across his lips. "Morning," he whispered. "Morning," I replied. And that was it. We didn't need anything more. That morning, as we made coffee in my kitchen, the sun streaming in and lighting up the dust motes in the air, I had my final reflection. My whole life had been built around lines. The line between professional and personal. The line between healing and desire. The line between a friend and something more. I was the guardian of these borders, the architect of my own limitations. And in a single afternoon, Cole didn't just cross all of them. He took the map I had drawn so carefully and tore it into 1,000 pieces, and in its place, he showed me a vast and unknown territory, a place with no lines, only connection. I learned that the touch of my hands could do more than relieve muscle pain. In that room, at that moment, it healed something in me that I didn't even know was broken, my self-imposed loneliness. And I hope I healed something in him too. The journey ahead of us is uncertain. There are conversations to be had, explanations to be given, a new way of being to be discovered. We don't know how to tell our friends. We don't know how to navigate this new world we've created. But looking at him now, laughing at something I said as he puts too much sugar in his coffee, I realize I'm not scared anymore. What you're hearing here is just the beginning. The full stories, unfiltered and with all the details you can imagine, are available now. Check the link in the description right now. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like to get access to more stories like this. Our story didn't end on that massage table. It just truly began. It was built on a foundation of 6 years of trust and affection. And now, it holds the promise of something much deeper. And if you believe that a single moment, a single touch, can completely redraw the map of your life, then subscribe and turn on notifications. Leo and Cole's journey is just getting started, and you won't want to miss the next chapter. Because the future, we're going to write it together.